live on Sky News Australia. The Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening, happy Australia Day, and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. I'm Liz Storer. Coming up tonight, Invasion Day rallies held around the country. Lockdown leader Brett Sutton handed an Australia Day honour. Texas Governor Greg Abbott's explosive letter saying the state has a right to self-defence from a migrant invasion. He's not wrong. But first, this Australia Day, I want to talk about a forgotten Australian. If there's one thing us Aussies share in terms of a value, it's an intolerance for injustice. It gets right up our noses. We hate bullies, people in power punching down. You've undoubtedly heard of this forgotten Australian, but what you think you know of him is likely untrue. The corrupt elites hate him. He's a menace to them, uncovering lies in their upper echelons of power for all the world to see. So they say he's a criminal, and they'd have you believe the same. I say he's a hero.
The power of people speaking up and resisting together terrifies corrupt and undemocratic power. So much so that ordinary people here in the West are now the enemy of government, an enemy to be watched, an enemy to be controlled and to be impoverished. True democracy is not the White House. True democracy is not Canberra. True democracy is the resistance of people armed with the truth against lies.
Yes, I speak of Julian Assange, our Townsville-born boy. In less than a month, his case will define not only his fate, but the fate of free speech in Western democracies. The importance of this case cannot be overstated, which of course is why you've heard little to nothing about it.
People don't realise that this is the single most important media freedom case of our time, and it affects everybody in the world. Although Julian is the person who's being persecuted, and although Julian is the person who's locked up for having done nothing more than publish the truth, the result, if he is extradited and if the United States government is successful in prosecuting him for exposing these truths, will be that no individual anywhere in the world will be free to expose the truth of another state that some state might find unappealing. It will set a precedent, not only in the United States, not only will it change the interpretation of the Official Secrets Act in the United Kingdom, but it will also set a precedent all over the world.
So what is his supposed crime? I'll tell you. Exposing wholesale abuse and war crimes committed by the United States. In 2010, Assange got his hands on classified documents with the help of a US Army soldier by the name of Chelsea Manning. The documents were classified because they were proof of the United States war crimes on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. Assange published them online via media organisation and publisher WikiLeaks. Now, the US government really didn't like being humiliated like that. So much so that the director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo at the time, reportedly discussed killing Assange even before he'd been charged with any crime in the United States. Sure, CIA, because that would really prove that you were the good guys murdering people who embarrass you. Do you do this often? As Assange puts it, the overwhelming majority of information is classified to protect political security, not national security. Is he wrong? Needless to say, he's been on the run since, holing up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 7 years by way of sanctuary. But for the last 5 years, though he has not been charged, much less convicted of a crime in the UK government have held him in their worst prison in a maximum security cell in isolation, keeping him for the US government, who has been trying desperately to extradite him. Last year, Tucker Carlson paid Assange a visit. Here's what he had to say immediately after.
Well, that's just a total outrage. I mean, it's a total outrage that they're holding that man who hasn't committed or even been charged with a crime in this country. I mean, that's a maximum security prison filled with murderers, and the people who reside there, the inmates, are treated like animals. And he's not an animal. He's a journalist who has committed no crime. And so anyone who's in favor of that, anyone who supports his continued torture, is your enemy. He's the enemy of free expression, of free speech, of the basic liberties that used to define the United States.
Now let's take a moment to go back to Chelsea Manning, the trans woman without whose assistance Assange would never have been able to access these documents. They were pardoned by the Obama administration and are now living their best life being a DJ. You really can't make this stuff up. Here was Obama at the time explaining away the inexplicable as only politicians.
It has been my view that given she went to trial, that due process was carried out, that she took responsibility for her crime, that the sentence that she received was very disproportionate relative to what other leakers had received.
Okay, well, since this is about proportion and we wouldn't want to be disproportionate, why is Manning free while Assange is facing 175 years in jail should the US get its way in court next month? Also, should the US government, who planned to kill him apparently, really get to try him in a court of law? Call me crazy, but I've got serious reservations about Assange's chances of a fair trial. We already know they'd just like to Epstein him. What he got on them was so damning, they didn't even include it in their own indictment. Mowing down civilians. It doesn't get much worse than that. Of course, the Australian government has done absolutely nothing to help Assange. At the very least, they ought to bring him home where this can play out here. Shouldn't be a hard ask, given it's supposedly our closest ally prosecuting our guy, right? He is an Australian citizen. But no, nothing. Because if you speak truth to power, the corrupt governments of this world will stop at nothing to ruin you, jail, bankrupt, erase you. Mark my words, the hell that they've made Assange's life is meant to serve as a warning to the rest of us. This is what happens to you when you dare expose us. But to paraphrase what Assange himself said at the top of this editorial, it is up to us. We're the resistance now. Joining me now to go over the top stories this Australia Day is Sky News contributor Gary Hardgrave. Gary, happy Australia Day to you.
Absolutely, and shouldn't we be very proud of this country, and sad for those who just don't quite get it, that this is a day where most Australians are very happy to get together with family, friends, talk about what makes us great. Are we perfect? No, never promised that, but it seems extraordinary that somebody used the day to get our point across. You know, right now, Liz, I think we're being weakened from within our country. There are people outside our country who want us to be weak. And it's slowly but surely working because a lot in the media class have decided they want to give lots of publicity to, you know, genocide and all this sort of claims that people make. And a lot of it is based purely on hearsay and stories that have been passed on. Look, in the end, Australia is what Australia is. I am still absolutely gut-wrenched about the angle grinder that came out in the middle of the night and chopped Captain Cook off at his ankles when all he did was, as a great navigator, great explorer, found the East Coast and charted it. back in 1770. Arthur Phillip came along in 1788, and somehow or other Captain Cook has to lose his legs. The stupidity of these numpties just knows no bounds.
And yet it seems unabated, Gary. And why wouldn't it be when you've got our own Prime Minister under fire for simply saying Happy Australia Day in his Australia Day message today?
Working together, we can make this an even better, stronger and fairer country. Happy Australia Day.
Star
Apparently wishing someone a happy Australia Day is an act of deliberate cruelty on this day of mourning, Gary.
Well, it's absolutely ridiculous. Look, I love our Australian flag. It's a symbol of our national unity. There are a lot of other flags that people like to fly from time to time, Liz, but look, that is one flag. We are one people who can really rally around one flag. If you're anywhere around the world, you know exactly what the Australian flag looks like if you need trouble. We also wrap ourselves in it during times of glory. Yet you've got not just the Prime Minister, who's unsure about what his view on all of this is. He really isn't. He'd be looking at the polls before he'd make these statements. But you've got people who are holding positions of great authority, like cricket captains and vice captains. You know what happened at the Gabba today? Hardly anybody went. You know, people in Brisbane decided, I don't think we need to be showing up at the woke cricket. And those who did were confronted by those who were screaming that the cricket shouldn't have been held on Australia Day. It's like people believe in free speech as long as they're the only ones doing the talking. And yet, Liz, we as a country, we celebrate our differences, we celebrate our unity. We've got to come together on days like this. It's really important we do, because people around the world are trying to pull us apart. Their agents are everywhere in our big corporates. I mean, I want our Qantas back. I want my Woolworths back. I want my cricket back. I want these people to get out of the way and let us get back to the way we always used to be.
Hear, hear, Gary, preach. I think everyone needs to take a leaf out of Bev MacArthur's book. Check this out. She's the Liberal member for Western Victoria. And I think she's got the right idea for dealing with the haters on Australia Day. Take a look.
I'm delivering a flag to Samantha Ratnam, leader of the Greens, because it's most important that everybody has a flag to celebrate Australia Day tomorrow. And I'm very sure that the Greens don't have a ready supply of Australian flags, so I think it's most important that the leader of the Greens has an Australian flag. Let's see if she's home. No answer. I don't think she is home. But anyway, Samantha, here's your flag. Happy Australia Day.
Love your work, Bev. That's the Aussie spirit, isn't it, Gary? That's how we deal with the haters, I think. Just reignite the Aussie larrikin in us.
Well, look, I know Bev well, known her for a long, long time, served with her husband. Look, can I tell you, she walks softly, she talks softly, but she's carrying a flagpole. I mean, what a terrific response to all of that. And I feel sorry for people who live in electorates of the Teals and the Greens, who today weren't able to fully commemorate their citizenship ceremonies the way in which others did. I know that all around Brisbane, there were thousands of people, for instance, became citizens today. A massive ceremony at City Hall that the Lord Mayor ran, as he always does, and different councillors in different places, including, you know, one Liberal councillor was praised by the Speaker, Milton Dick, as, you know, being a real gem. For those who are becoming citizens, you've got the best councillor in Brisbane. So, you know, Angela Owen, good on you for doing that. I guess what I'm trying to say is, we've got a great country. We should be proud of it, and we should be welcoming people and realise that January 26 is a part of the family history of millions of people, because that's the day in which they become citizens, and yet these people pour scorn on it and say they should somehow or other be embarrassed by it. I'm not embarrassed by it. I love Australia, and I'm happy to entertain the jerks who don't.
I love that. That is the Aussie spirit, Gary. And no need to tell me, I used to be a city councillor, and I tell you what, Australia Day, we used to have a massive citizenship ceremony. People would cry. They were so happy, as they should be, to be pledging allegiance to the greatest nation on earth and be welcomed into the Australian family. They recognised it as an honour. It's our PM and seemingly every Labor government in the country, as well as 81 now, 81, Gary, local councils in this fair nation who refuse to hold citizenship ceremonies on this blessed day. It's an utter disgrace. But staying on Australia Day, can you believe Victoria's former health officer, Brett Sutton, has been made an Officer of the Order of Australia for, get this, quote, distinguished service to the people of Victoria through public health administration and governance. Gary, I'm sure Victorians who suffered through the longest lockdown in the world, and this guy's inexplicable to this day, still waiting on the health advice or any proof of the science, his draconian lockdowns, I think most Victorians would sooner think this guy belonged in jail, not receiving honours.
Well, that may be the view of a lot of people, but just walk a mile in the shoes of Brett Sutton for a moment. He's incredibly well connected in Canberra through family and professional links, and he only gets an Order of Australia AO, Officer of the Order of Australia, because it's distinction in service. He's got to go before a person who was made the governor and gets an AC, the higher level gong than he got, to receive that award. And Queensland, the health officer who did exactly the same as Brett Sutton did, followed the same daft advice. She was made the governor and got an AC. So, you know, I think he might be a bit miffed today that he didn't get as big an award as he should have. And by the way, you know, he gets the AO. Dan Andrews will get an AC very soon. You mark my words, he's about to get a companion of the Order of Australia. And if there was a knighthood, he might have gone for one of those. I mean, Victorians have got to sort this out. There is a real fundamental problem in Victoria when it comes to citizenship, when it comes to understanding they're part of a nation. That Captain Cook statue that was pulled apart was put up in 1914 in the middle of World War I. No doubt was fundraised for a community that was saying, we're a brand new nation, we should be proud of the bloke who actually put us on the map, so let's put up a statue. And these people have come along and destroyed it. You know, so celebrating Brett Sutton, well, I'll let people work out that for themselves. As I said, I think he'll be miffed he didn't get a bigger badge.
I just think, in the eyes of many Aussies, it makes a joke out of the entire award system. Gary, thank you so much for your time this evening. And again, happy Australia Day.
Cheers.
Still to come, Cricket Australia have changed their minds about something our viewers care very much about. More on their embarrassing walk back right after this. Welcome back. Well, if it isn't the consequences of Cricket Australia's actions. The sporting giant bent the knee to the will of Australians today, actually acknowledging Australia Day on its Australia Day Test coverage, something that they'd formerly said they wouldn't do. I mean, the man acknowledging it then went on to talk about how it's a day of mourning and hurt, etc., etc., etc. But small wins, right? Baby steps. Joining me now is Saxon Davidson of the Institute of Public Affairs and New South Wales One Nation leader Tanya Mihalek. Tanya, when did this start? This sporting bodies lecturing on us on where to stand on any number of issues, whether it's constitutional change, LGBTIQ issues. And do you think we're ever going to see the cultural tide turning whereby they'll just pull their heads in?
I think we will see the tide turn, actually, Liz, because I think people have had a real gutful of all this sort of wokeism and tokenistic gestures and PC. I think people are really sick of it. People just want to get back to enjoying their life.
And enjoying a game.
And enjoying their sport and, you know, stop with the politics. There's enough politics. So, and I think everyone's had a gutful of it. So I think cricket will learn lessons, and so will many of the other corporations and institutions that try to play politics. They will see that people will walk away and basically have had a gutful. So I think that the time has come where the tide will turn and people will actually be able to enjoy their sport and enjoy their life without this never-ending sort of politics.
And we could say that we've kind of seen that already and them doing this little but noticeable 180. So here are some of the choice words uttered at some of the Invasion Day rallies taking place today. Take a look. Tanya, they're really missing out on a great day at the beach, some fireworks, a snag and everything modern Australia has to offer. Yeah. I thought their movement was all about peace and kindness and inclusion.
Yeah, funny that. Doesn't look like it, does it?
No, not getting that vibe.
Can I just start by saying Happy Australia Day to everybody? Because despite that, I'm really proud to be Australian and I'm certainly have enjoyed my day. Went out to the harbour today, we went fishing and my family actually enjoyed Australia Day.
Beautiful.
Look, these professional protesters really are just victims of this blinkered activism. And I think everybody is really sick of it. For my part, I'm a child of migrant parents who actually won the lottery when they were given the opportunity to come to Australia. My family was really blessed. We had the opportunity to come to Australia, become citizens. My parents worked, bought their own home, earned their own keep. They were always really proud to be Australian.
That's the true Australian dream right there.
And for me, it's a day of reflection and being thankful and grateful for the opportunities that this country has bestowed on my family and indeed on millions of Australians. The blinkered activism that you're seeing here with these professional protesters, they're just propagating hate. It's an industry of hate.
It is.
And it's all about making, why not actually be grateful for what they've been given? Okay, why not actually say thanks for the opportunities that have been bestowed on them?
Where's the attitude of gratitude? Saxon,
Absolutely.
Your IPA offices are in Melbourne city centre. Did you find yourself swept up in the protests happening there?
Well, the thing with these protests is that they're actually a loud minority. We released some polling earlier this week that found that 63% of Australians want to celebrate Australia Day on January 26th. That is an overwhelming majority, and only 17% want any change regarding Australia Day. So these people are actually a loud minority. They aren't an overwhelming amount of people to justify any change. And they're actually being backed up by these woke corporate elite who got the voice to Parliament disastrously wrong, trying to lecture us about all of that. And they're trying to lecture us again with these loud minority voices. So really, mainstream Australians have been able to find their voice recently. That's why we've seen the back down from Cricket Australia and the minor back down from Woolworths. And with right political leadership, we'll be able to do this all again next year and the year after that and so forth and keep Australia Day on January 26th.
Hear, hear, the battle rages on and power to the majority because, as you say, they want it to stay the same. We want it to stay the same. Unfortunately, entrepreneur and former Australian of the Year Dick Smith has joined the cohort of people saying it shouldn't be on Jan 6. He says, I think we could have this first Fleet Day and also change the date of Australia Day to something else that's more inclusive. But I don't know what that date would be. Wow, that's compelling and rich, Dick Smith. That's the problem with these change the date people. They can never actually come up with a more suitable date, can they, Saxon?
Not at all. And I'm not in favour of changing the date or the name of Australia Day because it's actually conceding ground to these activists who don't want to celebrate Australia whatsoever. You can't concede ground. We must remain it on January 26th as the majority of Australians wish it to be.
Well said. Every capitulation to the left emboldens it. That's one of my mottos, and people need to learn that, because one capitulation simply leads to the next. Now, Dick Smith says he first suggested this in 1986. So he's been a long-term campaigner of change, Tanya. How much longer until you think this dispute is resolved?
Can I just say, I don't actually recall Dick Smith making that announcement in 1986, 87. But I do recall that, look, Dick Smith's been passionate about Australia-made products. He's been a beneficiary of actually selling Aussie-made, Vegemite and Aussie-made tomato sauce. I actually remember him advertising that on Australia Day and around Australia Day in the late 1990s. So he certainly knew how to make a couple of dollars on the back of Australia-made merchandise. And I've got to say, I don't know if First Fleet tomato sauce or First Fleet barbecue marinade is an appetising.
Doesn't have the same ring.
Doesn't have the same ring, does it? So he certainly knows himself that that First Fleet probably won't sell, and I don't think anyone's buying it. So look, I think we're going to see this sort of debate every year, unfortunately. Okay, and I think we've just got to get used to people coming up with this idea that every year let's change the date. And we've just got to get past it and just move on. The vast majority of Australians today went out and enjoyed Australia Day. They had barbecues with their mates. Absolutely. They're still out there having a drink down at the harbour and enjoying themselves. So that's what matters, I think. I think the vast majority of Australians are enjoying Australia Day.
The vast majority of Australians do have their heads screwed on. Now, this week in Melbourne, we saw a Captain Cook statue as well as a Queen Victoria statue absolutely desecrated by vandals who were actually stupid enough to video themselves doing it and posting that video online. Check it out.
Young, black and gifted, talking the whole package. Magic, lights, camera, action. You are now witnessing the power.
How's the soundtrack, Saxon? These guys basically portraying themselves as like renegades, as if Batman in the night had come to fell the colonialist powers.
It's all incredibly bizarre, but this can all be pinned on in a failure of, I believe, our education system, honestly, and our national curriculum. I mean, if our young Australians were properly taught about our history and not given this woke wash of alternate facts, really, and alternate storylines about the foundation of our nation, and actually about how Australia's founding with the First Fleet actually established the institutions that make us who we are, the rule of law, our parliamentary democracy. And without this lack of understanding, unfortunately, you get these vandals who are defacing our historical figures in this manner.
You've hit the nail on the head, Saxon. I was thinking, watching this, Tanya, what chance do we have of quelling these kinds of displays for outright hatred of the country, of its history, or what little these vandals know of it, when this is coming straight from our education departments? We know it is. And it's very evident in the leaders in this country who tiptoe around Australia Day or anything that could be seen as staunchly patriotic.
Well, that's right, and it does start with education, but you've also got to actually punish this type of behaviour, because it's not a political act, it's a criminal act. And the books need to be thrown at these people, honestly. You've got to actually punish this sort of behaviour. People need to learn a hard lesson that you can't vandalise statues, it's not a political statement, it's just a criminal act. The problem with education, of course, is every state now and territory, you'll see that they're absolutely obsessed with rewriting Australia's history. I asked those questions recently in budget estimates, where now they want to see welcome to country and acknowledgement of country taught to 5-year-olds at kindergarten. Okay, that's now the priority for kindergarten kids, as opposed to maths and reading. So you do have a problem, and it does start with education. You've got teachers that are playing politics in the classroom, and they're teaching these kids this absurd left-wing indoctrination that makes them hate Australia instead of loving Australia.
Well, no argument from me. That is what we're seeing across the board, Tanya, unfortunately. Meanwhile, the ABC's news boss, Justin Stevens, is holding listening sessions with culturally diverse staff and all-staff weekly town halls as the broadcaster frantically tries to keep workers in line. Dozens have been in open revolt since the sacking of fill-in host Antoinette Lattouf over posts she made about the Gaza war. I don't think this ABC mob want listening sessions. I think they want the managing director's head on a plate, Saxon.
Absolutely. And no directors that they put in charge will be able to stop what the ABC truly is, and that's a entirely activist, staff-driven organisation. Now, if what they truly wanted was for alternate opinions and diversity of thought at the ABC, they wouldn't be having a staff directive, which they currently are, or listening voices for the ABC staff. They'd be actually having harsher actions from their directors, being able to say, listen, we actually need alternative voices from mainstream Australia. This is why the ABC got it so wrong on the Voice to Parliament, how they get it so wrong on Australia Day every single year. We actually need real alternate voices on the ABC, not this pseudo-type, we're listening thing that they're doing now.
Saxon Davidson, thank you so much for your time. Tanya Mihalik, thanks for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Still to come, Texas Governor Greg Abbott's explosive letter saying the state has a right to self-defense from a migrant invasion. Stay tuned for that. Well, we all know immigration is well and truly out of control in Australia. Get a load of this. 1 in 36 people in Australia today arrived last year. We took in 737,000 migrants in 2023, the largest migration in our history. Astronomical numbers nobody asked for. But spare a thought for America, where they've seen more than 6 million illegal immigrants cross their southern border in just 3 years. Last week, Texas took matters into their own hands, barricading their border with barbed wire and blocking the feds' access to Eagle Pass, since all the feds were doing was letting them through. This week, the Supreme Court ruled that the Biden administration could cut down said wire, proving yet again that not only the White House, but also the Supreme Court has decided to destroy America by allowing it to be invaded, effectively leaving the population to defend itself. Well, that's exactly what Texas Governor Greg Abbott intends to do. Check out his letter following the Supreme Court's ruling. He spares no firepower, writing, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and the other visionaries who wrote the US Constitution foresaw that states should not be left to the mercy of a lawless president who does nothing to stop external threats like cartels smuggling millions of illegal immigrants across the border. He goes on to write, I have already declared an invasion under the relevant article and clause of said Constitution to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. That authority is the supreme law of the land and supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. Joining me now to discuss is US filmmaker Ami Horowitz. Ami, thanks so much for joining us. It's our national day here, Australia Day. So everyone else is on the cans at the moment.
Yay, Australia Day. Good for you guys.
That's the spirit.
Back here, that was enough of me talking about Australia. Let's talk about America.
Here. So tell me, if Governor Greg Abbott holds the line here, Ami, he could become one of the most significant governors in American history, couldn't he?
His letter was a masterclass in constitutional interpretation, right? It really broke down the issues in a very interesting way. Now, again, I think a lot of people listening to this might say, wait a second. They're cutting down razor. Why the hell wasn't the razor wire up in the first place? Why wouldn't there be razor wire when you have millions of people coming through your border? It's an obvious question. It's a good question. And like we said, the better question might be, why is the president insisting on cutting it down, right? The immigration issue has recently become the #1 issue in America, surpassing even inflation issues, because everyone is seeing, including people in the blue cities, that this is affecting the entire country and it cannot stand. Yet, the president, who stands at a 70% disapproval rate on the most important issue in America, continues to push down the line of open borders. It doesn't make any sense. But what we are seeing now is a bit of a constitutional crisis in our country. Now, the Supreme Court did say that the federal government can tear down the razor wire. What it did not say was that Texas couldn't put up more razor wire. So you have this absurd situation where you have federal border officials tearing it down, and right behind them are Texas officials putting it right back up. Literally what we're seeing. And, you know, if you listen to CNN and MSNBC and the BBC and everything else, they'll say that Texas is acting illegally in putting up this razor wire. That is absolutely not true. That is not what the Supreme Court said. But what it is doing is setting up a bit of a constitutional crisis. Because on the one hand, the Constitution does say that the federal government is in charge of the U.S. borders. On the other hand, it does say that the states can take action to stop invasion. And part of the legal argument Abbott is making is kind of a novel way of saying, look, this is an invasion. We consider this to be an invasion, and therefore we have the right to protect our sovereign state borders and take these steps. It's fascinating. And frankly, Liz, it's a little bit scary, I got to be honest.
Yeah, I don't doubt it for anyone there on the ground, but I would think that the vast majority of Americans would be championing Governor Greg Abbott's take on this. Go for it, buddy. The buck stops with Texas. If they manage to hold the line on this, it is going to set a really important precedent for the rest of the nation. Naturally, this is, as you've said, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, deciding factor this election year. Let's take a look at what Trump said this week he'll be doing about how many people are coming to the country and what kind of people are allowed in.
I will immediately restore and expand the Trump travel ban on entry from terror-plagued countries, and I will implement strong ideological screening for all immigrants. If you hate America, if you want to abolish Israel, if you sympathize with jihadists, then we don't want you in our country. We don't want you.
Is it any wonder he's won both primaries so far, Army? This issue alone could get him the gong, couldn't it?
I don't look. The left and the legacy media will do whatever they can to paint what he just said is racist. And that is patently insane. Nothing he said there was racist. Every single thing he said made complete and utter sense. And yes, you're always looking for these 60-40 issues, right? That's how you win and lose elections. You want to push on the 60% versus 40% issues where you can get the country. This is even more, this is 70-30, this may be 80-20. This is basics, ABC on how you have to protect and continue to have a sovereign nation. Why would you want to allow people in who hate your country? There's a lot of people out there who hate America. I don't want a single one of those people in my country. I'm glad he said it, but I promise you that will be painted by the legacy media on the left as Trump is a racist, Trump is xenophobic. That's what you're going to see.
That's what they do with common sense. Sadly, it's no different here, Army. Now, a poll from the Public Religion Research Institute this week shows that over 25% of Americans born between 1997 and 2012 now identify as LGBTIQ, which is, of course, significantly higher than previous generations. Army, would you say that this proves that there is some sort of social contagion going on? What else could explain such a phenomena? This is obviously the first generation that spent their childhood and or teenage years on social media, which is awash with LGBTIQ type stuff, sitting in classes where diversity is held up as the only virtue, and also living in a society that idolizes victimhood. Was this always going to happen?
Well, I think you said it all yourself. I think you don't need me as a guest. I think you set it up and said it perfectly. That's exactly what it is. It's total social contagion. How else can you explain where from the millennial generation to Gen Z, it has gone up almost 100% in affiliation as queer, which, by the way, is a term I cannot fully understand. By the way, to this day, nobody can explain to me how queer is different from being gay. But nonetheless, that's how they're self-identifying. There's a tremendous amount of peer pressure to race to see how unhomophobic, you could be. It's so weird, and I'm not exactly sure how to explain it other than this weird peer pressure. And like you said, a social contagion. I think that really does set it up.
Normalize everything. That's what the left seem to want, no holes barred. Ami Horowitz, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Always a pleasure.
Still to come, the brilliant Douglas Murray joins us from Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu is in hot water over his comments about Qatar, because, of course, he was right. That's right after this. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being portrayed as a real stick in the mud for peace mediation efforts in the Israel-Hamas war, with the Qatari government now proclaiming they are appalled by leaked comments he made where he criticised Qatar's role in the peace talks. Netanyahu allegedly told families of Hamas hostages, quote, "You don't hear me thanking Qatar, those who are essentially no different from the United Nations or Red Cross, and even more problematic. I have no illusions with regards to them. They have the means to put pressure on Hamas. And why? Because they finance them." Now, Netanyahu has been pilloried for saying this because it's true. Predictably, the US State Department came to Qatar's defence, saying it's been, quote, "an integral, irreplaceable, key regional power," end quote. Do us a favour. The relationship between Israel and the US is increasingly under strain, with the Biden administration, as ever, pushing for a two-state solution, which Israel rightly opposes. Make no mistake, the idea of Palestine being a state should strike fear into the heart of anyone in possession of a single firing neuron. Gaza is one of the most ideologically radicalised parts of the world. They elected Hamas. Their becoming a state would grant them the right to amass their own military, make trade deals, defence pacts, foreign investment, and everything else that comes with being recognised as a sovereign state on the world stage. How does any rational person think that's not only a good idea, but a solution? Best-selling author, intellectual titan and Sky News contributor Douglas Murray is in Israel and joins me now. Douglas, always a pleasure talking to you.
Great to see you.
You also. Now, the Palestinian Authority has turned down the two-state solution as many times as Israel has agreed to make painful concessions for peace. What is it going to take, do you think, for Western leaders to stop pushing for what would, in reality, be a nightmare, not only for Israel, but for the world at large, and to realise the Palestinian Authority will never want a two-state solution? They want no Israel.
Well, that's right. I mean, there's a very strange thing that's happened in recent months, which is that in Israel, the two-state solution question has been arguably sort of settled for some years, in that it's perfectly obvious after what happened on October 7th that Israel cannot live, the Israeli people cannot live beside a terror group that wishes to annihilate them, because sometimes that terror group will get lucky and actually have a go. So in Israel, there's very understandable. What's strange is in that same period, seeing foreign statesmen and others come into Israel and say, you know, this is why you need to double down on the two-state solution. There's several problems with that. One is just the moral one of, to say that this is the time to create a Palestinian state, which even the left and centrists in Israel absolutely don't say anymore, is to say, because of October the 7th, the Palestinians should be rewarded with a state. Well, that just incentivizes and rewards terror. The second thing is that the West Bank, which could have been part of a Palestinian state, is so close to all of central Israel, including the city I'm sitting in this morning, Tel Aviv, that they would be able to fire not just rockets but artillery across the whole of Israel, like Hamas did on the West Bank and in Gaza. And nobody thinks that's really possible. And the final thing is that, as you know, Western politicians seem to think that the Palestinian Authority are sort of good guys, and Hamas are admittedly the bad guys. Sometimes they admit that. But that therefore you should give stuff to the good guys. The thing is, the Palestinian Authority are not good guys. Among other things, they have amazing amounts of support for Hamas. There's enormous support for Hamas within the West Bank. If there was an election there, Hamas would almost certainly win. And here's the other thing. Much of the Palestinian Authority's current budget, paid for, by the way, by international taxpayers, including Europeans, Americans, I think Australians, much of the budget of the Palestinian Authority goes to the so-called slave for pay rewards, which is money from the Palestinian Authority budget, which goes to the terrorists who carry out attacks on Jews, and if they're killed, to their families, to reward them on a scale that advances depending how high in casualty figures your terrorist attack was. This is money for terrorists paid by the PA, paid to the families of terrorists to reward and incentivize terrorism. That's the Palestinian Authority. And they have just admitted, or boasted, in fact, that they are going to pay the terrorists and families of the October 7th attack. How is this a viable peace partner?
Imagine thinking that they should be allowed to run a country. It's just unbelievable that the West is still spouting the same old, same old. It just shows a complete lack of sense of reality of what is going on in there, and as if any Israeli is of a mind to adopt such a policy now. It's unthinkable. Now, you write in The Spectator that conservatives in America are facing a dilemma. Their Republican candidate will undoubtedly be Donald Trump, but you say Trump is both the problem and the solution to America's woes. For those viewers who haven't read your column, can you unpack that for us?
Sure. I mean, it's no secret now that Donald Trump is almost certain to be the Republican nominee for the presidency this year. And of course, that means a reopening of the whole Trump circus. It's back. Trump is back. And the Republicans have a very interesting problem here, as do the Democrats on their own side. The Democrats basically incredibly fearful about running Joe Biden, but don't know what else to do. Their one hope, it seems, is that the one person who Joe Biden can still defeat would be Donald Trump because of Donald Trump's disapproval ratings among independents. However, for Republicans, it's a different matter. And my view is that for Republicans, this presents several very, very considerable problems as well as opportunities. The problem is that thing, again, on independence. There's almost nobody in America who doesn't have an opinion on Donald Trump by now, in favor or otherwise. And the question in an election which will actually rotate on a couple of 100,000 votes is whether Donald Trump is the big, brash, ugly tool you need to finally defeat the Democrats and get them out of office, or in fact, as I say, the one person who could allow Joe Biden back in. It's going to be partly centered, this axis turning. It's going to be partly centered on the American economy this year. If in either the next 2 quarters America goes actually into recession or close to it, or even if the American economy flatlines for another couple of quarters, I would have said the chances of Donald Trump getting the White House back are very high indeed. However, if Biden manages to literally just stumble on, the story could be otherwise. But it's an incredibly fraught time for conservatives and Republicans in America, because, of course, the way in which Trump operates is that once it's clear that he's the big beast again, he demands total loyalty from the other candidates. We've seen some of that this week, with the exception of Nikki Haley, who, of course, is still hanging on in there. They swear total loyalty to him, and then, in general, he you can set your watch and wait for him to trash them at some later date. But no, the results seem to be in, and it does certainly seem to be Trump.
It does. And if I got to vote, it would be Trump all the way. I don't see how America could possibly do any worse than what they are now. And when Trump was in the hot seat, America hadn't had it that good economically since the 60s, of course, before COVID, that is. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
That's it from me tonight. Up next is the US Report with James Morrow. Good night and happy Australia Day.